What is it like getting residency abroad? Today I wanted to compare residency across the globe, the requirements for getting residency, and then of course also the maintenance requirements. Now the first and probably the most difficult to get and maybe also to maintain is US residency. I'm a resident of Texas, and it's one of the countries where it's just the hardest to get residency. I mean, legally, you can get into the country through other means, but getting legal residency is actually not easy. So if you're lucky and you participated in the green card lottery and you got in, good stuff, congratulations. But a lot of the times you can only get in, through being petitioned by a family member or investing a large amount of money into the US economy. If you did that, fantastic, you could have secured yourself a green card, right? But US residency comes with many strings attached. It's definitely a great residency to have if you want to capture the North American market. The United States is the largest native English-speaking market in the entire world. So if you're interested in monetizing and dominating the largest English-speaking market by incorporating a domicile US LLC, then that's the way to go. And as a resident of the United States, you would actually have to live in the country for 183 days per year. This is what it says right in the legislation. So typically that's what you need to do. Some people spend more time in the United States, some people spend less time, but typically to be a legal permanent resident of the United States of America, you have to spend at least 183 days per year in the country. If you spend less than 183 days per year in the United States, perhaps immigration will soon be asking you questions as to why you have spent so much time outside the country. It may happen, it may not happen, but generally this is what happens. Another important consideration is that as a legal resident of the United States of America, you actually have to file a yearly tax return. Even if you didn't have any income, oftentimes you have to file your tax return. So in filing a US tax return, if you have companies, if you have personal bank accounts, let's say you have assets abroad, it gets very complicated very quickly because you must inform the IRS about all your foreign assets. And your income tax return must really be perfect. I mean, they roughly know how much money you made anyway. There's no real way of hiding it, especially if all of it originated from United States sources. They know how much you made, give or take. There's a thing called the F-bar that you have to file every single year, assuming you have foreign bank accounts, foreign financial assets that exceeded $10,000 in account value, during the past year. If that was the case, you would have to file for the F-bar, right? If the combined value of your accounts is below 10,000, you would not have to file. But if during any time, any moment, during the financial year you're filing for, the account balance was above 10,000, then you would have to file. Even if the amount was spread out over multiple accounts, let's say in one account you have 4,000, in another 8,000, you would have to file. So it doesn't apply, to one account individually. As long as it exceeded $10,000 in account value, then you would have to file. And this is kind of tedious. It's not nice to do. Most Americans and US residents, they don't want to be dealing with this, but unfortunately it's part of the deal. It's the cost of doing business. It's just how it is, so you have to do it. And there are other countries, we're going to get to those, where you don't have to do this. Another consideration is that if you become a US resident and you've been a resident for so many years and you have accumulated a certain amount of wealth that exceeded $2 million during your time of being a US resident, you would have to pay an exit tax. Now, this is not fun. Let's say you made $10 million during your time of US residency. Let's say you lived in the United States for 10 years and you made $10 million. You had accumulated a net worth of $10 million. Then an exit tax would be applicable. Even if you're not a citizen, right? That's how they get you. This is part of the equation too. Now, there are some contingencies here. If you have been a resident for fewer than 8 years and if your net worth didn't exceed the threshold, then you would not have to pay the exit tax. But of course you would have to pay all income taxes, all corporate taxes, all capital gains taxes, all kinds of taxes needed, that were due during the years you were a US resident or citizen, but we're talking about residency in this video. So, there are some caveats attached to US residency that most of us don't want to be dealing with, and oftentimes people get US residency and they have no clue about the legal responsibilities associated with US residency. And after they have gotten it, they're like, well, what did I get myself into? I didn't think it would be this difficult, it would be this complicated or this tedious. They didn't think about any of this, and it's just part of the equation. It's the cost of doing business. US taxes are the cost of doing business. You're leveraging off of a legacy brand country, and so there has to be a cost. So maybe US residency is one of the worst. Then, one of the worst just in terms of like compliance and in terms of like tax returns and foreign financial bank account reporting and all this kind of stuff. It's probably the strictest country in the entire world for this, for finance, for your income. Then probably comes Canada. It's pretty bad too. With Canadian residency, you have a ton of responsibilities. I personally have conducted business with Canadians who were audited before. They were questioned about certain deductions, and it took a long time to resolve these issues. I've personally never been a tax resident of Canada, so I can't really comment specifically on the exact procedures because I'm not involved in it, even though we have many Canadian clients. So I kind of know what's going on, and I do read legislation and I do read certain things, but it's not my forte, right? But Canadian residency, for you to surrender it and move out of Canada and remove all tax obligations that you have to the Canadian authorities, will actually take a lot of time and effort to do so. And now to get documents apostilled in Canada, oftentimes you actually have to wait for a period of well over 3 months. And I think this is happening because the Canadian authorities are considering raising exit taxes and introducing maybe new taxes and just making it harder for Canadians to leave, because they're just seeing that a lot of Canadians are looking to depart the country right now. And so Canadian tax residency is very similar to US tax residency. So it is worldwide taxation. So in Canada, as a legal tax resident of Canada, you pay taxes on your worldwide income. It's not just on Canadian sourced income. You would actually be taxed on everything that you have earned abroad during your time of Canadian tax residency. And it's the same in the United States too. One of the pros of generating income from a country that Canada has a tax treaty with is that, you may be able to avoid double taxation, because Canada has double tax treaties with many countries worldwide, especially in Europe. And so if you have some kind of income from there, like rental income, or if you have some kind of local income that's generated there, you may be able to not pay taxes on it in Canada. But of course you have to pay taxes to the country where the income is being generated in. And so while you may be able to avoid double taxation, you're always going to have to pay taxes to one country. But at least there are double tax treaties in place when you're a resident of Canada or the US, whereas if you get residency in different countries, a lot of the times you don't get any double tax treaties or just a few. So with the US and Canada, you get a lot more. What we had seen from clients who departed Canada recently is that they had to, do a tremendous amount of work in order to surrender Canadian tax residency, in order to exit the Canadian tax net. They had to do a lot of things that were pretty unpleasant. We're talking about closing businesses, quitting jobs, selling real estate. Very extreme things that really make you scratch your head and be like, why did I get started with this marriage in the first place? But that's one of the problems with Canadian tax residency. And, if you are a citizen of Canada and if you want to, distance yourself from Canadian tax obligations, you actually have to put in a lot of work before the Canadian authorities will let you go. It is not an overnight thing. It often takes weeks and even months of tedious and hideous effort before you can depart Canada for good. Now that we talked about US and Canada residency, probably the most difficult ones in terms of tax obligations and its separation, a divorce, let's talk about some other residencies that are also flawed. I feel like some of these residencies exist in Southeast Asia where you just never know what you're gonna get. What I mean by that is you just don't know if you're gonna be able to renew your residency the time it expires. And we had seen such incidents in Thailand where residencies really change a a lot. They give you more time in the country, then they give you less time, then it's a different visa, and then they remove the visa altogether. I mean, we had seen so many changes out of Thailand that make you think like, why am I getting started with Thai residency in the first place? Why am I not just a perpetual tourist, a perpetual traveler that doesn't have to deal with this kind of stuff? And obviously Thailand is just one example. If we take a look at what happened to the Malaysia My Second Home program, which is widely considered a residency program, but it's really not residency because there's no path to citizenship, which is one of the biggest downfalls of Southeast Asian residencies. Whereas in different geographic locations like Europe, Latin America, and North America, you have a path to citizenship, but in a country like Thailand, you have no path unless your children are born in Thailand and they have the privilege of obtaining dual citizenship at birth. We're not looking at more options. We just don't have more options here. But one of the things that's usually good about Asian residency is that governments there don't particularly care about your financials that much, unless you bring money with you into the country. Now we have seen in Thailand that income from abroad will be taxed assuming you bring it with you into the country. So if you have a local bank account in Thailand, and even if you're like a pensioner in Thailand, if you live in Thailand, but if you bring that money with you into Thailand, it would be taxed. If it's like a pension, if you have some kind of offshore passive income, they may tax you now. Whereas before, that was just not the case. So we're seeing a tightening in policies across Southeast Asia. And with Thailand being, on top of the list, we're talking about how difficult it is to maintain residency and just always being in the unknown about what's going to happen next. It is a very unpleasant experience. Being a resident of Thailand is not associated with a ton of predictability. And because of this unpleasant fact, a lot of people decided to distance themselves from Thai residency altogether. They moved to different countries. Now we saw a pretty interesting and large exit happening from Thailand into the Philippines, where, a lot of these perpetual expats just get fed up with the ever-changing visa policies in Thailand, and so they decided to switch countries and ended up relocating to the Philippines, a country that has been much more consistent in terms of long-term visa policy. We're talking about its tourist visa system. We're talking about residency in general. Like the Philippines has just been a lot more consistent than a country like Thailand. And if you want to go live in the Philippines, you may want to consider the SRRV program. It's the special retirement program that the Philippines has. And that program hasn't really changed in many years. Even during the past health crisis, nothing has changed. And so a lot of Americans and Canadians find comfort in the consistency the Philippines demonstrates in its visa policies, giving it a much better name than a country like Thailand, where you just never know what's going to happen next. And what we had seen in Malaysia was definitely disturbing, where the previous administration decided to make drastic adjustments to the Malaysia My Second Home program that left many people scratching their heads and wondering whether they could remain in the country or not. Thankfully, the initial announcement that happened during the past health crisis was discontinued, so the verbal statement that was made by Malaysia's officials, government, was actually reversed because there were a lot of complaints coming in from existing Malaysia My Second Home pass holders that were completely disappointed by the fact that the government would break such an important agreement that was formed at the time of signing the contract. So a lot of people, don't trust Malaysia as much anymore because of its lack of consistency and honesty in visa policies. And that's why also our company decided to no longer promote Malaysia. The money doesn't matter to us. We only want to do business with countries that are reliable, consistent, and that have ethics. And so we decided to discontinue our business relationship with Malaysia for now. If there is, again, consistency in legislation, and most importantly, consistency in just your words, because a man is his word. If there's no consistency in what comes out of your mouth, then, you're just not a person worth doing business with. And I think that's what a lot of Western expats in Asia realized, that maybe Malaysia and Thailand are just not the best of choices anymore. So Vietnam is just not a great country for permanent residency. It is a great country for quality of life. And to be perfectly fair, all these Southeast Asian countries are beautiful. They offer a phenomenal quality of life. life that is worth pursuing, assuming you don't fall into the residency traps that I just exposed inside this video. On the other hand, these Asian residencies are probably still better than being a perpetual tourist, because as a resident you still have more rights. Even if it's Asia, you still have more rights. But even during a time like we had seen during the past health crisis, where residents of these countries were not allowed entry during parts of the past health crisis. They were refused admission, and so that left a bitter taste in the mouths of many expats. And a lot of the expats that I know, they don't want to go back to Southeast Asia because of the disturbances that happened during the past health crisis. So they pivoted to Europe and Latin America, where visa policies are more consistent and where governments actually honor residency a lot more. But overall, Southeast Asia is a great region to live in, so I'm definitely going to keep saying this. It's just in terms of civil rights, property rights, it's just not the best of regions. And the past health crisis definitely highlighted this fact. Then we have EU residency. One of the things I want to say about EU residency is that it comes with a lot of privileges, especially the path to citizenship, which is something that a lot of expats are after. So as a legal tax resident and as a legal resident of a European Union country, you're obligated to pay taxes to that European Union country on your worldwide income. So there's really no territorial tax possible. And please don't cheat the European tax system, because they will figure out sooner or later. There have been instances of people that were heavily penalized, like public figures, influencers, like all kinds of people were heavily penalized because they broke the European tax law. And it's very unfortunate that even people in our industry partially recommend things that go against the legal code. I don't want to say any names, but there have been certain statements made to clients of ours, obviously during private discussions that I can't mention, but it's really important that you don't break any laws, especially as and while you are a legal tax resident of a European Union country, just as much as you wouldn't do it as a legal resident of the United States or Canada. This is very important because certain countries enforce the law much stricter than others, and you don't want to end up in a situation where you have to pay hefty fines or even face imprisonment. So please don't do that. And especially in countries that are more technologically advanced, it's just not worth pursuing. Anyway, I just wanted to make this quick point. Now, in terms of minimum stay requirements, you're looking at 183 days in European Union countries. And as said, worldwide taxation applies. There are really no exceptions here unless there is a double tax treaty in place, or you can commit to legal tax avoidance, not tax evasion, which is illegal. You may find legal tax avoidance strategies to implement to reduce your legal tax burden to the European Union country you are a resident of. So there are legal options in place, but for the most part, you will not be able to do much unless you have certain company structures in place, right? But we're talking now about personal income that would be taxed. Now, with European Union residency, there are many requirements to get to citizenship. Like, in most countries, you need to meet the language requirements. There are also history requirements in certain countries, and just there are a lot of requirements, and oftentimes the path is like 8 to 10 years. So this is no walk in the park, and you must have lived in the European Union country consistently for the number of years it takes to obtain citizenship legally. And there are some shortcuts, and we're going to get to this in a moment, but you're looking at about 8 to 10 years of residency until citizenship can be obtained. Now, let's talk about some of the shortcuts, like getting residency by marriage. Now, there are shortcuts in countries like Italy, Spain, and a couple others, where if you immigrate legally, become a resident through marriage, you can do it in maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It depends on the European Union country, so you may not have to wait for 8 to 10 years. And of course, this is a very specific condition, and oftentimes we can't really meet this requirement because we are already married and we want to immigrate as a family, or we want to immigrate as an investor. And if that's the case, guess what? This option is not in place for you, right? It's not available. But I'm just saying, like in Spain and Italy and other countries, you can definitely shorten your path from residency to citizenship by a lot. A country like Spain offers a very interesting option to Latinos, so to people from, Central America, the Caribbean, and also South America, where they can obtain citizenship in as little as 2 years. Because a lot of them have Spanish ancestry, they can get a Spanish passport much quicker than a lot of other people. And a lot of them are actually now taking advantage of this, I wouldn't say loophole, but legislation that's been passed a long time ago, where they can legally immigrate to Spain and obtain citizenship. In fact, there has now been, in the past, they actually had, a very special ruling where people who overstayed their visa in Spain and they were from, say, Latin America, they could have converted to residency even though they didn't have a legal work permit. And that's what a lot of people do when they come to Europe and they don't have a visa. They actually overstayed their visa, which is illegal, but then a country like Spain may actually help you with legislation that says that, okay, if you overstayed, we will grant you residency. And then you have that maybe 2 to 3 year path to citizenship, assuming that you are from a Latin American country. Now, in terms of taxes, the European Union is not the best. There are some exceptions like Bulgaria, where the corporate tax is just 10%, the income tax is just 10%. So that's a great place to form a company and live in because, let's say you have an income of maybe like 300,000 to 500,000 net per year, you can pay little taxes, 30 to 50,000 in taxes legally. And so it's not really worth setting up a ton of complex company structures that would maybe cost you tens of thousands of dollars to put in place. It would probably make more sense to just immigrate to a country like Bulgaria, get a trade representative office visa, get a residence permit, and become a legal tax resident of a country like Bulgaria so that you can then go ahead and pay, one of the lowest tax rates in the European Union. Actually, in terms of income taxes, it is the lowest. In terms of corporate taxes, Bulgaria is only being beaten by Hungary at this point. Hungary has a corporate tax rate of just 9%, which is very conducive, to entrepreneurs and businesses looking to scale a business that's predicated on retained earnings. So because of that, a lot of people go to Hungary, a lot of people go to Bulgaria. Obviously, there are also non-European Union countries in Eastern Europe where you can set up a company structure that is very tax friendly. Another thing about European residency that I haven't really pointed out is that once you become a citizen of the European Union, doesn't matter, which country we're talking about, as long as you become a citizen of an EU country, you can enjoy freedom of movement. Well, that says if you have an EU passport, you can go live in a different EU country. This is great because it gives you access to all the European Union countries. You can go live there. You don't have to qualify by school enrollment. You don't have to qualify by investment. You don't have to, do anything. So you can just go there. But once you've lived in the country for more than 90 days, that's the case in most cases, right? You actually have to become a resident of that European Union country. So what a lot of Europeans do is they pivot between countries because they enjoy the freedom of movement. Like some of them stay longer than 90 days, but technically in most cases, you actually have to get residency if you've been in the country for 90 days, which is a pretty straightforward process. You don't have to incorporate a business. You don't have to invest in real estate. You don't have to qualify by school enrollment, or you don't have to get married. So if you're an EU citizen, that's a tremendous privilege that you get to enjoy. Whereas an individual from America, Canada, or Australia, New Zealand, or a different country would have to get a residence permit to make this happen. I wanted to touch on Latin American residency, which is, an area that we cover with our company Nomad Elite. We help people relocate to different Latin American countries, including Paraguay, Argentina, Mexico, and Uruguay. So what we do is we, help people get residency. We help people minimize their taxes, and we also do this in Europe. I haven't even mentioned this. So we operate in Spain, Italy, Greece, Switzerland, some Eastern European countries now. So we help you minimize your taxes, and you can also do it in Europe. But for the middle class, a lot of the times, unless you want to go to Eastern Europe, Latin America can be better, especially if you want to take advantage of the same time zone. If you work with North America, then Latin America is probably a better option. Unless you want to capitalize on the tech talent in Eastern Europe, then, it could make sense migrating to Europe. Latin America offers many territorial tax systems where you don't pay taxes on overseas income, at least not most of it. There are some exceptions, right? But most overseas income would not be taxed, like a pension, social security. If you have some kind of passive income, right, you would not pay taxes on that as a legal tax resident, say of Panama, of Paraguay, and there are a couple of other countries that also offer a territorial tax system. Now, there are countries like Uruguay that offer a tax exemption. This is not a territorial tax system. It's a big misconception. exemption, where some people say, oh, Uruguay offers a territorial tax system. No, it's not. It is a tax exemption, which is a very different thing, because once you run out of years, the tax exemption goes away because it's only valid for a limited number of years, and then you would be obligated to pay taxes on your worldwide income as a legal tax resident, say of Uruguay or a different Latin American country that granted you a tax exemption. So tax exemption and territorial tax system, are just not the same thing, even though people make it sound like it, but it's not true. It's a different legislation. What's also great about Latin American residencies, some of them, is that the minimum stay requirements to retain residency are actually quite low. We're talking about Panama, we're talking about Paraguay, we're talking about Mexico, we're talking about Panama, where the minimum stay requirements are very, very little, right? Of course, unless you want to work towards citizenship, then that's a different story. In example, Paraguay, to maintain temporary residency, you're looking at a minimum stay requirement of 1 day per year for the first years until you convert to permanent residency. Then it drops to 1 day every 3 years. That's the current legislation. Obviously, that can change, but that's what you're looking at, right? So in an EU country, you're looking at 183 days per year to be a legal tax resident and to not lose it. And some countries are very strict with enforcing this policy. In some Asian countries, it's also more lenient than in Europe, than in North America. So Asia and South America are just better places where the minimum stay requirements are typically a lot less, or that just don't care as much. So Paraguay would be a great place for that. Or like Mexico, they don't expect you to live there 183 days per year to maintain residency. And the same can be said about a lot of other countries in the region. Now, there are some countries in Central America that require you to live there for 183 days per year. And they may be strict with enforcing it or not. So that's a whole other question. But in terms of taxes, just low local taxes like in Paraguay, where the income tax will never exceed the 10%. There are certain deductions you can take. And for the corporate side, it will also never exceed 10%, right? Can even be less than that. So there are some really good benefits attached to it. Or in like different countries, where, in the Caribbean, where the corporate tax rates are very favorable for offshore companies, you can qualify for 0% corporate tax rate. There are just a lot of good things going on. And so while I'm personally not the biggest of fan, of the 5 flag theory, we're talking about middle-class expats, because for a middle-class person, you want to have as much as possible in one geographic location, because oftentimes you don't have the financial resources to diversify, because it takes a lot of maintenance, accounting, sometimes yearly audits to maintain your companies and residence permits. So I don't believe you should have residency in 3 different countries. You should have bank accounts in a few countries and maybe companies in a few countries. That makes sense to a millionaire, to a multi-millionaire, right? So if you're upper middle class, then that's fine. Or if you are rich, then that's fine. But if you're middle class, you want to have as much as possible in one geographic location, ideally in one country as possible. However, I'm going to say you don't want to have everything in one country, because then you don't have any diversification at all. So you probably want to have, certain assets spread out in maybe 2 countries or 3 countries max, but you want to have the least maintenance possible. That's very important to a middle class person. Now, if you're wealthy or rich, then it doesn't really matter, because you can afford to outsource and hire these people, right? For instance, I have real estate in Europe. I have companies in different countries. I have residency in multiple countries, but it takes money, time, and energy, and also outsourcing labor to maintain this. And you also need to travel a lot, so this also must fit your lifestyle. There are some serious implications tied to residency that you carefully want to consider before committing to obtaining residency in a foreign country. And if you're interested in learning more about it, if you want to get expert consultation on the best possible residence permits that fit your individual needs, then please book a consultation with us. And if you're interested in obtaining residency in one of the countries that we talked about, be it in Eastern Europe, in Southern Europe, or in Latin America, then please contact us and we would love to help you. Thank you so much for watching Nomad Elite. We appreciate you, and we see you on the next video.